Again, on behalf of the vestry and staff here at St. Anne's, we're honored that one of our own, Dick Shriver, with his wife Barbara, lived for years in the Ukraine and have wisdom and experience that are so invaluable at this critical time in the history.
Well, this certainly isn't, what's his name?
Friends, please mute yourself. I have the power to mute, which I'm doing now, because what you don't want is, okay. Friends who have joined us, please do keep yourself muted so we can hear every word from our speaker. As we settle in, let me read the bio that Dick said, oh, just use part of it. And I said, no, we're going to read it all. We're going to use it all. Good, right answer. So this presentation will include a commentary on the relationship between Russia and Ukraine from antiquity to the present. It is being recorded. There will be opportunity for questions. Dick Shriver served his country in the USA Air Force, Director of Telecommunications and Comrade and Control Systems in the Office of the United States Secretary of Defense, Assistant Secretary, U.S. Department of Treasury. For a period, he was Senior Vice President of Chase Manhattan Bank. In 1990, he was Adjunct Professor of International Marketing, Trade, and Finance at the International Management Institute, an MBA granting startup college based in Kiev, Ukraine. Also in 1990, he started a US 503c3 CIME, the purpose of which was to promote democracy and free enterprise inside the Soviet Union. In 1991, he and his wife Barbara founded and published the Ukrainian Business Digest for the ensuing 5 years. CIME was active in Ukraine, Georgia, Lithuania, Latvia, and especially Estonia, for which country CIME partnered with the Estonian government in the 10-year development of a rule of law program following the collapse of the USSR. In 1992, Dick joined the International Executive Service Corps as Vice President, responsible for US-funded technical assistance to the new independent states of the former Soviet Union. From 1995 to 2001, he was partner in charge of the Lev Consulting Group, a market company and merchant banking consulting firm based in Liev, Ukraine. In 2002, Dick formed and oversaw the Private Sector Development Task Force for Afghanistan. Dick retired. I'm not sure what retirement really means for Dick. In 2007, as Provost Emeritus, European College of Liberal Arts, now Bard College in Berlin. He is author of the book, Glimpses of an Uncharted Life, and recipient of the Defense Distinguished Service Medal and Treasury's Alexander Hamilton Medal. And we claim him at St. Anne's, along with his lovely wife, Barbara, as one of our own. So we are honored, delighted that he has given us this time. And just a reminder, this is both being recorded, and I would ask everyone, please, on the listening audience via Zoom to stay muted, please. That will help us with our sound. As, uh-oh, no, just something happened here. Let me get this back. Kathy, where are you when I need you? Just a moment. Oh, I don't think I did anything, just. Yeah, Kathy, this is why she's standing right by my side. What did I do here?
I just made it smaller somehow.
I don't think I did. Just give us a minute. Oh, I don't want to do. Oh, no.
Nope. No. It's behind there.
He's behind there. There we go. Okay, we're not going to touch it. So he doesn't need to see himself. He's just okay. All right. Okay. A reminder: please stay muted. Please don't fuss with anything so we hear. Dick, you see lots of people in front of you, and you just focus on the mic. Can you all hear me? Yeah. Okay. Great. Okay. You've all been waiting for Dick. Dick Shriver. Okay, there we go.
I think we know who just blacked out our machine here. Thank you, Anita. Thank you, St. Anne's, for inviting me and Barb for this event. I want to thank Bob McGill. Bob is here? He may be here on the Zoom call, but Bob called me Wednesday or Tuesday last week and asked me to do this. And I talked to Anita and she said, well, you can do it either this Sunday or next. Who knows where we'll be by next week. So thanks very much. So when Barb and I lived in Ukraine during the 90s, we traveled to Russia a dozen or so times for various reasons. And when the opportunity arose, we would ask our Russian hosts, what do you think of Ukrainians? And they'd say, well, they're okay. We have our spats, but they're like family, cousins. If you ask the Ukrainian the same question, what do you think of Russians? You got a stunningly different answer. 300 years of oppression, domination, murder, night knocks on the door, midnight knocks on the door, boxcars of people headed for concentration camps, genocide, unbelievable thing. Ukraine has wanted its independence for a very long time, and Russia has prevented that from happening for a very long time. There were a couple of big surprises this past couple of weeks. We've not seen much cyber warfare. I expected Russia to just turn off the lights in all of Ukraine and walk all over everything. It didn't happen. The internet and phones have worked and people have lived as a result. They're still working. They may not be working tomorrow, but the communications throughout Ukraine are just as good as before. The Russian armies appeared clumsy, young, untrained, lacking purpose. Ukrainians have purpose and they fought hard. It makes one wonder if Vladimir Putin has kept his crack troops on the sidelines. I don't know. The biggest surprise to me was that Putin actually attacked. I couldn't believe it. I'm sure some of you couldn't believe it. A lot of people couldn't believe it, but it happened. Now I think of Putin's alleged goals, stated goals before the invasion. He wanted to restore Russian greatness. We okay? Ivan? He wanted to denigrate, demean, and dismiss Ukraine. After all, it was just a small, unimportant country full of drug addicts and Nazis. And the borders of Ukraine should vanish. The very word Ukraine should fade away, disappear. It was never a sovereign nation. That's Putin's story. He wanted to weaken NATO and the US. In fact, Ukraine is not really an enemy. What's the beef? The US and NATO are the real enemies. And he, Putin, would be recognized and respected as an important world leader. Instead, in the past 10 days, Ukraine is now world famous. More famous than ever in a good way. Ukrainians are seen to be brave, decent, smart, willing to die to protect their independence. Putin and Russia, by association, have become pariahs, perhaps for a very long time. NATO has never been so united or sounded such a certain trumpet. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Walter Zelensky is recognized internationally as a great leader. In a few short days, Putin has brought about the exact opposite of everything most people think he wanted to achieve. Does he care? Or will he try to get even with everyone in every state that has tried to thwart him? Every entity that has aided Ukraine in this fight. Let's take a look at this map. I'm sorry you all can't see it on the Zoom, but I'll explain, describe what we're talking about. And you've seen a lot of this map in the last 10 days. This is Ukraine, about the size of Texas, size of France. And just first the border. Russia, and I'll include Belarus, because Belarus is really a captive of Russia. So the Russian border goes halfway around Ukraine, all the way to the Polish border. And then we hit a bunch of NATO countries, Poland, Slovakia, Czechia doesn't border on Ukraine, Hungary, Romania, 4 NATO countries. We lived in Kiev, and we lived in Lviv, over here on the left, way over towards Poland. The Dnieper River divides Ukraine roughly in half. And here's one of the myths. The eastern side of Ukraine is mainly Russian speaking, but not Russian thinking. They're Ukrainians. The west of the Dnieper, they're Ukrainian speaking. And this is kind of the source of capital nationalism in Ukraine. Santa can't hear me? I'll stay here. It's probably better if I'm here.
Friends, if all of you online could mute, please, that will help with the sound.
We okay?
Yeah. The
Donbass region, these are the 2 regions where the fighting has been going on since 2014. This is a war. It's a real war. People have been dying. Some 10 or 15,000 Ukrainians have died in the lower region there in the last 6 years. The biggest city in the east is Kharkiv. It's almost demolished. Looks like it's demolished from the videos that we've seen. Kiev, of course, is under attack. And down in the south, the Russians have taken the ports. They haven't taken Odessa yet, but that's expected to be attacked very soon. So when the ports are gone, that's the only sea way of getting goods in and out of Ukraine. Odessa is a huge port for getting materials, commodities, agricultural products out of Ukraine, huge. And it's, this will be a big week for Odessa. This morning, I don't know if any of you heard this, but here's the town of the region of Vinnytsia and the city of Vinnytsia, the most unlucky city perhaps in the world. Hitler decided to build his easternmost bunker in Vinnytsia. 30,000 Ukrainians dug that bunker and were shot because they knew too much. 35,000 Jews were executed in Vinnytsia. And the Russians, in their purges of before World War II and after World War II, killed untold thousands in Vinnytsia. I can't imagine the trauma of a community living through that. That's just this morning. So I'm wondering, why did that happen? This is farthest west that we've seen any warfare. Well, right next to Vinnytsia is Moldova. After the Soviet Union collapsed, the Russians left a huge military base in Moldova. I don't know if they left it or it left them. So I haven't seen it mentioned in any maps yet, but who's going to bomb Vinnytsia? is probably this Transnistria Russian base, which is a huge part of this border of Moldova with Ukraine. Maybe we'll learn more about it this week. Our friends, anyway. What I propose to do quickly is a brief history, a chronology of the relations between Ukraine and Russia over the past 1,000 years. I'll do it in a few minutes. Beg pardon? Anybody there say something? So in the 10th century, basically, there was one Slavic nation, wasn't really a nation, but there were two tribes, the Northern Slavs, the Southern Slavs. Southern Slavs were more populous. They were the Kievan Rus in Kiev. You could say that before there was a Russia and Russians, there was a Ukraine and Ukrainians. In the 13th century, the Mongols were heading west, and a lot of people left Kiev and went north, and they became citizens of what is now Russia. The Mongols wiped out 48,000 of the 50,000 people in Kiev in the 13th century. So that part of the world was just decimated of leadership and people for a couple of hundred years. By the mid-17th century, the region was dotted with Polish and Lithuanian principalities. One of the princes was Bogdan Khmelnytsky, a so-called Cossack. While he was away, a Polish prince invaded his castle and killed his family. He galvanized other Cossacks and beat the Poles all the way from eastern Ukraine, all the way to what's roughly the current Polish border, and thereby created a nation that we now think of as Ukraine. He was concerned. I've got to show you a picture of Bogdan here. But I will get the other guy. In 1654, Khmelnytsky was concerned, thank you, that he couldn't hang on to the territory that he'd conquered. So he invited his Slavic friends, the Russians, and they entered into a treaty, a mutual defense treaty, Cossacks versus Russia, Ukraine versus Russia in 1654. The treaty was to last 20 years. Khmelnytsky died. Russian troops had come in to protect Ukraine, and the Russians forgot about the 20 years, and they've been there ever since. The troops remained. And the beginning, it was first for protection, and then it gave way to intimidation and the oppression that we've seen over the years. By the end of the 1800s, Ukraine was referred to as Little Russia. Barb and I went to Ukraine in 1990. We came home, we talked to a group about our experiences. We said, well, we were in Ukraine. He said, how'd you like Russia? They didn't even hear the word Ukraine. The propaganda and the information and the whatever resources they used had really closed Ukraine out of people's minds long before Putin. Enter Taras Shevchenko, a Ukrainian born into serfdom, an artist and a poet. He gained his freedom when he was 24, and he wrote poems. Every poem he wrote in one book is exhorting Ukrainians to throw off the yoke of Russia. Every poem. He became a hero, a nationalist hero for Ukraine, and is today a symbol of Ukrainians' quest for freedom and independence from Russia. I'm sure he's on the battlefield today. So here's an odd sidebar. Gary Powers is shot down by the Russians in his U-2 over Russia in Sverdlovsk. Eisenhower is embarrassed by the event because he had personally ordered this espionage on his former ally. But the Russians weren't particularly clean, so Eisenhower commissioned a statue of Shevchenko, this hero of Ukrainian nationalism. Can I hold it up here? There's Taras Shevchenko, a modest man, humble, poet, artist. Sorry about that. That's good. And this statue stands not only in Ukraine, but also south of Pennsylvania Avenue in Florida and Washington, thanks to Eisenhower. After World War I, Ukraine declared its independence and elected a president. Didn't last long. Russia squashed it, and we didn't hear about it again for a while. In the early 1930s, Stalin, a Georgian, but head of the Soviet Union, became frustrated, if not angry, with the farmers of Ukraine and southern Russia. They weren't collectivizing, grouping together where they could be controlled better and forming the kolkhoz, the collective farm. So in 1932, in the fall of 32, they gathered all the grain and the meat and the food into the state warehouses, and then none of it came back. And 6 million people died of starvation, 4 to 5 of them in Ukraine and 1 or 2 in southern Russia, really right over in this area here. So this is called the Holodomor, a tragedy that Ukrainians will never forget. Eleanor, you never met George Kennan. I never met George Kennan, but George Kennan was in the US Embassy in Moscow. And Russia, after World War II, was behaving strangely. We had created, the Allied powers had created the World Bank organizations at Bretton Woods. Russia attended, but didn't join. So the State Department asked George Kennan to send a 300-word maximum, 300-word message and explain why Russia was not joining the World Bank. Kennan was unable to do it in 300 words. His 8,000-word message is known as the long letter. And he explained why US and Russia could never be compatible as allies. Instead of trying to be allies, an impossible outcome, Kennan introduced the term containment. And that became US policy for many years. He also said there's an official Russia and there's an unofficial Russia. Official Russia can disavow the actions of unofficial Russia. Did you poison Litvinenko in London? No, we didn't poison Litvinenko. That's official Russia, but unofficial Russia guaranteed did. And Kennan's insights are valid today. Where we lived in Lviv, there was a police station just down the street. And shortly after World War II, the first thing in the morning, each day, 100 men were shot and killed in the police station. And their bodies were laid out on the trolley tracks for the families to come and identify. This went on for 2 years, 100 a day, out in the street. One of our friends was a dissident, Mikhailo Horan. We got to know him well. He spent 26 years. He pointed to the little window in the police station where he was imprisoned for 26 years. His crime, he had written things critical of communism. 26 years. He was spared because of his writings and his speaking. He had become famous and the Soviets didn't like to kill people who had become famous. In March 1990, when Barb and I were living in Kiev, where I was teaching, I was invited to go to Tbilisi to participate in a UNESCO conference. Some 30 countries were there. I was asked to give a talk on how democracy works. Anybody here could do this. Many of you better than I. After that talk, a Lithuanian came up to me, Petras Tvarianovičius, and asked if I would come to Lithuania. I said I'd love to. The very next day, it was announced in that room that Lithuania had declared its independence from the Soviet Union. We were speaking in French, so we didn't have to use the KGB translator. This is Soviet times. The Soviet Union has another year and a half to go. And so I asked Petras, is the deal still on? And I'll never forget what he said. Yes, we're leaving the Soviet Union. They will have to shoot every one of us. The animosity and resentment toward the Soviet Union within the Soviet Union was not confined just to Ukraine. The Union was falling apart from within. Barb and I went to Lithuania in April of 1990. We loved the people. The Prime Minister asked me if I could put together a 3-day conference for the Lithuanian government on their role in a democracy. And that was the beginning of a new career. The period from 89 to 91, 3 remarkable people were in the right place at the right time. Mikhail Gorbachev, General Secretary of the Soviet Union, Communist Party. Boris Yeltsin, President of the Russian Republic within the Soviet Union. And President George H.W. Bush. Gorbachev was not sympathetic to the calls for nationalism in the various republics. However, he wanted to keep the USSR together without using extreme violence. A few dozen Georgians, a few dozen Lithuanians, a few dozen Latvians were killed, but that was an acceptable number. Barb filmed a huge demonstration in Kiev during 1990. Bush was very protective of his relationship with Gorbachev. The arms race put the US in the direction of the poorhouse, but it bankrupted the USSR. And as its economy was crashing, key Russophiles and intellects in the US began to make a case to prop up the Soviet Union. I'll not forget this. I knew 1 or 2 of the actors. They argued that an impoverished Soviet Union was destabilizing and bad for the world at large. And Harvard's Graham Allison and Russia's Grigory Yavlinsky wrote a book and an op-ed entitled The Grand Bargain. They claimed that for $30 billion, the US could help the Soviet Union survive and recover from a depression caused by their own unilateral expenditures on weaponry designed to destroy the US. Surprisingly, this bizarre concept had some support in our defense sector, especially Bush's national security advisor, Brent Scowcroft, Air Force General. He believed, and I don't recall how I know this, or if I know this, that if the Soviet Union collapsed, the US would have 4 nuclear enemies: Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and Kazakhstan, the 4 nuclear republics, and all 4 of the Soviet members of the UN. Stalin got 4 seats at the UN, not just 1. So for Scowcroft, it was complicated enough to plan for 1 nuclear enemy, let alone 4. But would the others have been our enemies? Ukraine was more likely to aim their missiles at Russia. And the Russians knew this. President Bush was invited to speak to the Ukrainian parliament in July of '91. In this speech, he implored the Ukrainians to give up their quest of suicidal nationalism. This came as a shock to the Ukrainians, as the vast majority wanted to leave the USSR. Condoleezza Rice, an advisor to the president, wrote this speech. It was an accommodation to Bush's friend in Moscow, Mikhail Gorbachev. The next day, William Safire, the token conservative writer for the New York Times, wrote a piece entitled Bush's Chicken Kiev Speech. Historians will debate whether Bush did the right thing. Few could argue with the result, however. A few weeks after Bush's speech, Gorbachev was placed under house arrest by his top military and defense chiefs, and the USSR was on its way down. Boris Yeltsin, president of the Russian Republic, had risen high in the Communist Party, decided communism was wrong for Russia and the Russian people. By the way, Bob Kriebel, a resident of Old Lyme, played a role in Yeltsin's appearance before a joint session of the US Congress in June of 1992. Bob Kriebel from Old Lyme. Later in the fall of 91, Yeltsin and the presidents of the other three nuclear republics, Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Ukraine, met secretly and voted to disband the Soviet Union. Many wanted parades down Wall Street. Bush was not going to gloat, and the Cold War was over without a shot. Then there was a question of who should control the nuclear arms of Belarus, Russia, Kazakhstan, and Ukraine. In 1994, a meeting in Budapest as part of the worldwide nuclear non-proliferation program. The result, Ukraine, Belarus, and Kazakhstan, Ukraine, agreed to give up its ICBMs and its nuclear warheads to Russia. In exchange, Russia agreed to honor the territorial integrity of a sovereign Ukraine. The Budapest memo was not signed by Ukraine. It was signed only by Russia, the UK, and the US. But this is the main treaty that Putin has now violated, among others. But while the USSR was gone, there's growing sentiment in Moscow for Russia to reconstitute the Soviet Union well before Putin is visibly on the scene. It wasn't so much a thought to reconstitute the USSR by conquest as it was a kind of nostalgia for the old days. The days when Russians in Moscow could enjoy the wines from Georgia and Moldova, fresh peaches from the Fergana Valley of Uzbekistan, dried fruits from Armenia. But within the political leadership of the newly independent republics, there was a genuine concern that the USSR might be reconstituted by force. One of our friends in Ukraine was Gennady Udovenko.
I'll hold it for you.
I'll
hold
Put it on the thing.
You can put your paper, you can put your papers down.
Beg pardon? Gennady Udovenko was the ambassador from Ukraine to the UN. He said, this is our Ukrainian Business Digest and our artist, Matt Davies. This is 1993. Gennady said, you should have a two-headed eagle representing Russia and little baby eagles representing the former republics, Kazakhstan, Ukraine, et cetera, Lithuania. And the big eagle is sweeping them back into the nest. All of this is to say that there was a sentiment that Putin drew on and expanded on for Russia to regain its former greatness as the lead country of the Soviet Union. Thank you, Anita. Above and beyond. Once Putin became president, he expanded on these cross currents in Russian society, and he expanded on it. He almost immediately set about, this is around 2000, 2001, eliminating dissident voices. We were in Ukraine at the time, and once a month, another reporter was shot in the vestibule. This, that, and the other thing. I remember Paul Klebnikov of Forbes. Anna, what was her name? Anna Politovskaya. Boris Nemtsov, a political opponent, was shot dead. And in recent years, we've seen Alexei Navalny oppose Putin. And today he's in prison. After a while, there were no dissident reporters visible in Russia, and the government took over all public broadcast media, which media began to broadcast and print only what Russian bureaucracy wanted the people to hear. This, of course, drew on Putin's strengths. A former lieutenant colonel in the KGB, stationed in East Germany before the Berlin Wall fell. He was well trained in disinformation, the use of poisons and other forms of thuggery. Famously, those allegedly axed by Putin himself, they knew they were going to be killed, and they kept doing what they were doing. Thereafter, Putin began to lament publicly that the biggest political disaster in human history was the breakup of the Soviet Union. There were overtures about putting it back together again. Of course, Ukraine would be the centerpiece. In Ukraine in 2013, a Russian sympathizing former thug, Viktor Yanukovych, became Ukrainian president. The election was contested, but who knows? And I have to say, to be clear, that Ukraine's regime was not squeaky clean. When we arrived in Lviv in 1995, we arranged a meeting with a group of Ukrainians, about a group this size, and I told them what we were going to do. And then at the end, I hope without too much pomposity, I said, and we're going to obey the laws of Ukraine. And a young lawyer burst out laughing. You want to obey the laws of Ukraine, you might as well lie down and die. 2 days later, we had an office. Said, well, we need a telephone. How do we get a telephone? Well, you go to the telephone office and apply. And in 2 years, you'll get your phone. Or you could take $100 bill, American, in an unmarked envelope and take it to the head of the phone company, and you'll have a phone the next day. What are you going to do? Back to 2014 and the Russia supporting President Yanukovych. He was from Eastern Ukraine, but actually the Donbass region. Apparently against his will, the Ukrainian parliament had plans to join the European Union. The papers to apply for membership were ready for his signature. At the last minute, he backed out and refused to sign the application, doubtless with encouragement of various kinds from Putin himself. There were protests. 100 people were killed. 1 million gathered in what was called the Maidan. 1 million people gathered in Kiev. Yanukovych fled. He fled to Russia. He's there today. He is Putin's candidate to replace Zelensky after the defeat. After Yanukovych, a man by the name of Petro Poroshenko became president of Ukraine, the chocolate baron. He made his money not from chemicals or steel or whatever, chocolate. With his man thrown out, Putin retaliated by seizing Crimea without a fight and with no significant complaints from the West. And the war in Donbass started. Finally, in 2019, Volodymyr Zelensky, no political experience, an actor, a political satirist, beats Poroshenko with 73% of the vote, a margin large enough to overwhelm most election shenanigans. So where do things stand today? Here's just some suppositions. I'm not optimistic. Putin and Russia have been surprised by the Ukrainian resistance. Their plans have been delayed, but they have not changed direction. Ukraine will be eliminated as a sovereign entity. A long-term insurgency will result, and that's acceptable to Putin. Ukraine will be beaten severely. Ukraine is not the end game. The US and NATO are the real targets. The next move is anyone's guess. Whatever Putin has in mind beyond Ukraine, he will have the support of China and, surprisingly, so far, India. The Russian people are told only what the Russian government wants to tell them. People who are educated in Moscow know enough not to watch the television or listen to the radio because they're not going to hear anything. It's not just, it's not true. It's designed to influence and change their way of thinking. And experts on Ukraine-Russia relationships are seeing signs in this information, this false information, that's preparing Russian people for the use of horrendous violence against the drug addicts and the Nazis of Ukraine. It is wishful thinking to me to suggest that Putin today is sick as anything less than 100% support of the political, military, and economic leadership of Russia, and maybe the Orthodox Church. Ukraine may be gone for now, but we heard from friends who left Kharkiv Wednesday and arrived in Hungary last night. We get a message. Ukraine has already won this war, no matter what they do to us.
Thank you, Dick. What a inspiration for us all here on safer shores. Let's take some questions first from the floor here. Any questions for Dick? I'm sorry to point, I don't know you. I didn't introduce myself. I'm Mother Anita. I'm the rector at St. Anne's. And yes, beside Jill Whitney.
Barbara.
That's Barbara?
Burnbaugh.
Barbara.
Dick, I wanted to thank you very much for this talk. I came to this room several years ago when you spoke about Ukraine, and that made me go out and read Tim Snyder's book on the floodlands. And I was completely horrified by how the forces of the world have swept across this country from both directions. I was curious about why, when you see all the refugees, they seem to be fairly well off. They seem to be middle class. And compared to Russia's population, which is extremely poor, I was wondering what generates the economy.
So the question is, why do the Ukrainians look so well off? They are well off. They're like us. I think their GDP, I've forgotten now, but corrected for purchasing power parity, is maybe a third of ours. And you'll notice it's mainly the women and children. It's not the men. You know, the president of Ukraine is there in a maroon t-shirt or khaki, olive drab t-shirt. Men don't care, but the women care, and the children are really well cared for. So they're well dressed. They have, and the textiles made in Ukraine, good quality.
Other questions from, yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
Hi, Vince Wilzinski, 30-year resident of Bowline. My wife and I both former Coast Guard officers. Can you speak a little bit about the Black Sea and its role in Putin's vision and its essential connection to Ukraine?
So the whole Black Sea, or just the
Well, obviously the
Crimea?
central part, yes.
A little bit. Let's say the question is, what about the Black Sea? How does that, and Crimea, and how does that fit into Putin's scheme of things? It's extremely important. Of course, it's the warm border port. Mariupol is just is over here in the Azov Sea, and Odessa over here. Mariupol's gone. It's part of Russia now. And Odessa, we're going to watch it this week. So ports are made for commerce. But did you mention Sevastopol?
I did not.
Sevastopol is in Crimea. It's a huge naval base. It is today legally Russia's Annapolis. It's also Ukraine's port for the Black Sea Fleet. And Russia has its fleet there, and Ukraine has its fleet there, and they've coexisted for the last 30 years, co-owning Sevastopol. It's a huge military base. The Sixth Fleet, you're in the Coast Guard?
We were.
And the Navy's represented here. The Sixth Fleet has the right today to sail into Sevastopol, and what's it called, Larry? You show the flag at the port of Sevastopol. So the flagship of the Sixth Fleet was there when we were there. We were invited aboard, and we met the Chief of Naval Operations of Ukraine. We didn't meet the Chief of Naval Operations of Russia. Uh, so it's an important military installation for Putin. Crimea is principally a vacation spot, known at least as a vacation spot for Russians. They come from Moscow and they take the air in Crimea. Of course, Yalta is on Crimea, the source of the meeting of the Big Three in 1945. So it's a huge commercial and military asset for Putin. Strategically, nothing's going to arrive by ship into Ukraine that's not under Russian control, probably later this week. And that's just like taking, I don't know what, maybe 2 ports of Newark, 2 or 3 ports of Newark, and they belong to another country. Is that?
Thank you.
Of course, there's also Georgia. Oh, hang on 1 second. Down here, about 50 or 60, about 100 miles, Putin has spent $2 or $3 or $4 billion on his own private dacha. This has to be in his mind that, maybe that's just too close to Ukraine for comfort. It's just a thought. So he's personally Sochi, where the Winter Olympics was, and Putin prevailed at the Sochi Olympics, and he was talking about the great Russians of history, Dostoevsky and Pasternak and Sikorsky. Sikorsky is Ukrainian. He's American. He came to Connecticut and built helicopters. He hated the communists, but he's Putin's now. Anyway, I think, and Georgia borders on the Black Sea. A lot of oil and gas come via pipelines and boats across the Black Sea. So it's a tremendous commercial area. And we get sardines or other little fish from that area.
Other questions here in the room? Yes, sir.
Yeah, Dick, with your knowledge of international banking, you hold out any hope that these international sanctions that are being put on Russia and the oligarchs in particular could pressure Putin, since they are getting their assets frozen in terms of yachts and houses and their own wealth?
So the question is, do I think the sanctions on personal property, oligarchs' property, are they going to stick? Is that right?
Yes.
I think there's another question: is it a good idea to begin with? But so it's a question in my mind: how good an idea is it to go after personal property, BJ? I mean, how do we justify that? That's beside the point. We should hurt them any way we can legally, or justify. So they'll stick if countries want them to stick. If you can take your boat, your ship anywhere in India, China, or Russia, or North Korea, or Iran, these are not particularly garden spots of the world. And if the rest of the world hangs together, they'll stick. I doubt it'll happen, personally, but it's possible to do. The US Treasury is pretty good at it. I think the Germans are pretty good at it. Yes, sir.
Tony Zima, wanted to thank you for this presentation and for your service to the country, sir. I was wondering what your thoughts were with respect to whether Putin is going to be content with stopping at Ukraine, or if he has designs beyond to conclude Poland, and most recently he is now threatening Finland and Sweden, and threatening that if they should become, or even think about becoming NATO members, that there's going to be a potential problem there. So what are your thoughts on that? Do you see this being a bigger risk, and especially since Poland is serving as a corridor supposedly for armed shipments to go over to Ukraine? Is Putin going to potentially use that as an excuse to start something with Poland?
Of course. So the question is, will Putin stop with Ukraine? He says he won't. And so far, he's done everything he said. We have to take him at his word. So he can threaten anybody he wants. It's anybody's guess what he'll do next. I'm guessing, I have my guesses. I think Georgia will be an easy country that he wants and can take over. It'll be worse than Ukrainian insurgency, but that's one possibility. Would he take a NATO country? He picks on Finland and Sweden because they've been a little bit reluctant with regard to NATO. But Estonia, Poland, I think everybody in those countries is desperately concerned, and rightly so. At what point, what can we do to stop him? I'm sure people are struggling in the Pentagon and elsewhere with that question today. And I don't see any good answers yet, at least not to stop him in Ukraine. So he will, if he goes to Georgia, he's not dealing with NATO. And he picked on Finland and Sweden for the same reasons. BJ.
Dick, as a follow-up to that, one BJ Burnham, do you have any views on the nuclear deterrent? It seems to me that the NATO countries in the United States are holding back because of our desire to avoid the nuclear confrontation. And folks in the news are unsure whether or not if Putin is backed into a corner, he would in fact unleash some tactical nuclear weapons. The concern, obviously, is that if a bully with nuclear weapons can, through intimidation, do what he wants, then how far do you let that go? So I guess my question is you, and you said earlier, it was comforting me that you don't think Putin was crazy, because that would be a good thing. But how do you evaluate his willingness to use nuclear weapons in the context of putting up opposition to what he wants to take over?
So the question is, would Putin use a tactical nuclear weapon? In essence, BJ?
I think that's where he'd start. He's not going to start by launching an ICBM at Washington, right?
Well, for years, we worried about that. Would Putin make a preemptive strike on Washington? Would he use a tactical nuke in Ukraine today? Two big questions. I agree with you. I don't think he's ready to pull the trigger on Washington or Berlin or London. But it would not surprise me if rather soon, unfortunately, a tactical nuke is used on one of these cities that's holding out that doesn't have important church assets. I think Kiev will be spared a bombing. It will not be spared door-to-door fighting. Putin has, he's done his best to shore up his relationship with the Orthodox Church, which, if you remember, during the Cold War was basically tied to the KGB. So it's an important part of the culture. How much can he hang on to? I think he thinks he could probably use a tactical nuke today in Ukraine. And the city that he's almost already destroyed, but that still has not fallen, would be Kharkiv. That's too much of a stretch for me at this point, but you can't rule anything out with Putin.
Well, let me just follow up quickly. If he were to do that, how should the West respond?
I don't think anybody knows the answer. If they do, they're not going to tell us. I will tell you, when I haven't seen a classified document in 30 years, but prior to that, we went to work every day and looked at the growth in nuclear warheads of Soviet Union versus the US. They exceeded ours around 1980. And we said, are they going to make a premeditated, unprovoked first strike on Washington with a submarine. Well, how far? 200 miles? What?
You got really close.
Pretty close. You know, a 4-minute lob of a ICBM on Washington. We worried about that every day, BJ. So people are worried about these things. Are they coming up with good answers? I don't know.
Let's take a different person.
Yeah.
From a Russian perspective, are they legitimately challenged by NATO on their western border?
Is Russia challenged?
Are they threatened by NATO on their western border?
No. That all the question is Russia threatened by NATO on its western border?
Or if NATO were to expand to its western border?
If NATO expanded into Ukraine, why would Russia be threatened unless it did something wrong? Russia has nothing to fear. There's no provocation from Ukraine. There's no reason for Russia to attack Ukraine 2 weeks ago. There's absolutely none. This is an unjust war. And war crimes, for what they're worth, will be imposed. Charlie.
Just quickly, you mentioned Putin's relationship with I assume the Russian Orthodox Church is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Because the Ukrainian church was not certainly on the Russian side in 2014.
Right. No, this is above my pay grade, Charlie. The question is the Ukrainian Orthodox Church or the Ukrainian churches supportive of Ukraine versus Russia?
Sort of, yes, because you also said that Mr. Putin would not want to bomb or hit those.
Yes, Kiev is an ancient center of Orthodox religion.
He wants to keep
Right.
those beautiful churches
Yes.
for Russia.
Right.
Mother Russia.
Exactly. So the Orthodox Church of Russia is different than the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. In addition, Ukraine has a Greek Catholic church, which is based in Western Ukraine. It's not Greek, but it is Catholic. It reports to the Pope, but it uses its Slavonic language, an agreement they made in the 16th century peacefully. And the Jewish religion, it was huge. The Pale was in Western Ukraine and Southern Belarus. The Jewish church was huge in Ukraine. Not so big today. It was, but I would say that religion is more of a concern to Putin than it is to anybody else, because if he loses religion, he starts to lose the general public. That's my feeling.
Let's take a question. We have one or two more from our online audience. Friends online, do any of you have questions? Probably best if you'd raise a Zoom hand to keep this so I'm just looking here. I'm not seeing anyone online who's got a question for Dick?
The chat or anything?
In the chat. Yeah, I know how to do that. Here we go. There's a couple questions. Okay. The question from Van Lampos. I am president of the Amnesty International Club of Lyme, Old Lyme High School. Thank you for that service. What can we do to support Ukraine?
Everybody hear that? Well, prayer. Let's not leave it, start there. So we got a letter from our friends in Western Ukraine. These are people we work with. They're making Molotov cocktails. They're getting ready. They said, send us wound stuff. It's detailed, and it's the stuff that medical people can work with. Money, of course, I think in the announcement, you had several organizations that are reliable that would take money donations. They want bulletproof vests. They want practical stuff, food, medicine. It's very tough to get it across the border, and it may become impossible. I don't know why it's possible today, but the material going across the border of Poland or Hungary or Slovakia and Romania today, it's huge. People are coming one way, and bandages and food and weapons are going the other way. How long can you hang on? They can't hang on forever. So you can help, but you might save some lives, or you might help people get out, but you can't save Ukraine. So, but I think it's still worth doing because it might work. I don't know. Any other questions here, Anita?
Anyone has a question online? Getting thank yous. I have a question. What do you think will stop Putin?
Well, you heard Lindsey Graham. We can all think it, but I don't know how smart it is for a sitting senator to say we should take him out. Putin's reaction, but I can take you out a lot easier than you can take me out. If I were Lindsey Graham, I'd be. Yes. I think the people of Russia, this is the big hope, is that those protests, of which there are more than we're going to ever know. We're never going to know how many thousands of people in how many dozens or maybe hundreds of cities in Russia have protested. They are not happy when they hear the real truth about what's happening in Ukraine. Bear in mind, they're not told what we are seeing on the media here. They do not see any of that. They're not seeing bodies come back because they have a portable crematorium. You want to see something grim. This is the most insidious. It's so awful, it's almost beyond our comprehension. So we have to go beyond our comprehension to think, how would this end? I believe the Russian people somehow, but the oligarchs, the economy controlled by the oligarchs is 100% behind Putin. The military is 100% behind Putin. And the political, the parliament is 100%, almost 100% behind Putin. It's too dangerous to go against him. You may be against him, but you're going to not show it. So when that builds up to enough momentum, particularly in the parliament, I think the military and the oligarchs are less likely to take action against him. So that to me, that's the, he's a very wealthy man, but maybe he'll become a lot poorer now. That'll affect his pride. I don't know. Maybe we should sue.
I have one question. Zelensky was pleading for planes to be sent to him. Is there any likelihood that we'll do that?
Oh, yeah. So the question is, are we providing Ukraine with, are we, the West, providing Ukraine with planes and other kinds of weapons? Of course, you know about the no-fly zone issue. It's a big risk if you want to declare, if the UN had the ability to enforce a no-fly zone and voted to do it, that might work, but not NATO. NATO would be an act of the US and Germany and England against Russia. But there are a lot of MiGs in Poland and some of the old Comecon countries, and Ukrainians know how to fly the MiGs. Oh, I should say, the Ukrainian Air Force headquarters is in Vinnytsia, and it was attacked this morning. So to your point, I think, the Russians are going to try and stop the flow of such weapons into Ukraine. One airplane can make a huge difference in this war. Yeah. Michael.
Make this the last question.
Unfortunately, I think it's a do or die for Putin. He's been excommunicated permanently, I believe, from the for the international community. So we're just looking forward, I'm just wondering how long we can possibly survive. Because there will be no communications between the West and Russia. Perhaps the one person that might have his ear would be Angela Merkel, who grew up in the Russian zone of Germany, probably at the same time that Putin was there with the KGB. She understands Putin well. They both speak fluent German, and I believe she speaks Russian. And although she's no longer chancellor, I wonder what role she could play in terms of bending Putin's ears, if that is possible. I don't believe it is. But just looking into the future, the relationship between the international community and Russia, while Putin is in charge, does not exist. You can only look toward these other countries, China, North Korea perhaps, and I don't know what's going on with India. I haven't come to terms with that.
So the question is, could Angela Merkel provide a diplomatic bridge between the West and Putin today? Maybe they knew each other. That's part of your point when he was in East Germany. But you know, Germany has been terribly conflicted. Barb and I were in Berlin when Gerhard Schroeder was the chancellor, and he was beaten by Angela Merkel. I think it was 2002. And a week after the election, he's in Russia as chairman of the Russian pipeline company, Nord Stream. So Germany is conflicted. Scholz is the new chancellor, and he got up and gave a speech last week, and he said, we have to rethink our energy policy. He is the boldest Western leader so far. He's leading the way. Germany knows what Russia can do. All of Eastern Europe knows and fears what Russia can do. Germany could be helpful generally in this, on the tough side. I don't know about whether whether he's amenable to discussing. I doubt it, Michael. You know, he has his mind made up. He has a vision of a flattened Ukraine, and it's going to be flattened. He's not going to, no matter what happens, he's not going to stop. What's the next thing after that? We don't know, but he's not going to stop when he starts that.
I think the main point I was trying to make is that I believe that Putin has backed himself up against the war and has very few options left other than to continue doing what he's doing.
Yeah.
I mean, just
By the way,
observation on the financial markets, the stock market is closed, the central bank has been sanctioned, all of its foreign reserves have been held. I mean, that's a pretty, even Switzerland has given up its neutrality. I mean, a big line would be a big obstacle that I don't think Putin has the ability to get through.
do you think he prepared for that?
I don't know.
But if the economy goes down the tubes, isn't there gonna be pressure on Putin?
Yeah.
One would hope so. So the comments are made that the financial and economic sanctions, will they influence somehow indirectly, secondarily, Putin? The consensus here is that Putin would cave. I'm not so sure. I think they planned this out pretty carefully. Ukraine has been a tougher nut than they thought, but they haven't changed direction. They've slowed it down.
On behalf of St. Anne's, let's thank one of our own, Dick Shriver and Barbara. And Barbara, the helpmeet, Barbara, the helpmeet. And thank all of you and those watching online. This is being recorded, so we'll work that out with Dick about how we can upload it. Thanks to the folk here at St. Anne's for the setup, and particularly, I think it was Kathy and Jill in particular, who were helpful with all the refreshments. If any of you are free to stay and help clean up, we would welcome that as well. And Dick will be around for a few more minutes with any further questions. Thank you all for being here today. The conversation continues.